Welcome to the third session of our webinar on the topic of do bad things happen to good people? We've changed the title. It's not why do bad things happen, but do bad things happen? And what we've talked about so far is that although painful things happen, even tragic things happen, but to call them bad could be incorrect, because we define bad as that which should not happen. And the question really is, can something that should not happen, happen? And the answer has to be that that's not possible. Things happen only if they should, because if there isn't some reason for them to happen, then by nature, or if you can use that term, by nature, nothing happens. There is no world, there is no existence, there is no creation, nothing moves, nothing happens unless there's a reason. God's reason, of course. But now the question really is, and this is the painful one, if people can be bad and choose to do bad, and their behavior or their actions cause me to suffer, couldn't that be called bad? It shouldn't have happened. People shouldn't do that. So can I be the victim of another person's bad choice? If we could find an answer to that, it would take away a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. When the Baal Shem Tov introduced the subject of Hashgacha Pratis, of divine providence, he wasn't introducing a whole new idea. Jews always believe, the Torah speaks about it in many places, divine providence. And very, very particular divine providence. So God not only oversees what happens to, let's say, humankind, God oversees what happens to every individual as an individual, every day, every moment, and every event. We knew that forever. What was the Baal Shem Tov adding, revolutionizing our understanding of how God runs the world? Interesting way of putting it is that as old as God is, he doesn't have any grandchildren. He has no grandchildren, because every child, every person, every Jew is his child, not his grandchild. So he has no grandchildren. So if I'm his child, my children should be his grandchildren. But no, my children are as much his child as I am. So he has no grandchildren. What that means, knowing that God runs the world, knowing that the wind does not blow unless God decides that it should be windy, knowing that leaves fall off the tree because it's the fall, and God wants leaves to fall off the tree in preparation for the winter. So if you know that God causes the wind, and you know that God causes the leaf to fall, isn't that enough to cause the wind to move the leaf from one place to another in the street? Does there have to be a divine plan for the movement of the leaf when it is carried by the wind? You see? So the wind is God's decision, the leaf on the floor is God's decision. When they come together, well, then naturally the wind moves the leaf. In other words, certain things happen by piggybacking on divine providence. The Baal Shem Tov came along and said there is no such thing. Nothing happens as a result of some other divine plan. So, for example, a legitimate question would be, Torah says that God tested Avraham by asking him to sacrifice his son. This was between Avraham and God, right? A test to see Avraham's loyalty or godliness. But in the process, Yitzchak was tied up and put on an altar, thinking that he is going to be sacrificed. Why would he go through that experience as a fallout from the test of Avraham? So where's the justice here? Yitzchak is suffering because God is testing Avraham. So it must be, and all the commentaries tell us that it is so. What happened to Yitzchak was supposed to happen to him because of his relationship with God. That by being brought up on the altar, he became holy of holies. He could not leave Israel ever because he doesn't belong outside of Israel. He is too holy to leave Israel, because once you go up on the altar and you become that holy, you don't go backwards. So for Yitzchak's soul and for Yitzchak's relationship with God, he had to go through that experience. So what was the test of Avraham? The test of Avraham was he wasn't told that this is what Yitzchak needs and that it's not going to be an actual death, it's just going to be an elevation. But the question is revealing. How is it right and how is it acceptable that Yitzchak should suffer a fright or a trauma or whatever it was as an incidental to Avraham's being tested by God? So nobody ever suffers incidentally. A person has free choice. A person decides to do something that hurts you. So your hurt is incidental to the other person's freedom of choice. That is not hashgacha pratis. So the Baal Shem Tov told us that that does not happen. Another example, of course, is a couple decide to get divorced. They just don't get along. They can't, and they get divorced. Devastating to the children. Well, that's what happens. You know, if your parents get divorced, you suffer. So the parents could feel justified in blaming themselves for what they did to the children. And to some degree, that's legitimate, but only to a degree. And that is, in your decision to get divorced, should you not have considered the welfare and the benefits to the children, the cost to the children? And for their sake, could you not have worked out the relationship and made it better? In other words, in your process of making a choice, you could have done better. But the fact that you made that choice, right or wrong, cannot possibly affect your children as friendly fire or collateral damage, an innocent bystander in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now is going to suffer for the rest of their life because of something you did. That can't possibly be true. So how are we responsible for our choices? Baal Shem Tov says, you are responsible 100% for your choices, not for the consequences of your choice. Morality lies more in your choice than in the consequence. So, for example, a person who chooses to kill and acts on it, but the victim, the intended victim, does not die. In terms of morality, the shooter is a murderer. He is a murderer. Because when God says, thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not murder, more correctly, when the Torah says, don't murder, it doesn't imply that you could murder anyone you want, so be careful and don't do it. That's not what it says. Don't murder means don't choose to murder. Don't try to murder. Don't become a murderer. How do you become a murderer? By making that choice. Even if the victim doesn't die, that's not because you're a good person, because you're a bad shot. It's because the person was not meant to die, and your wrong choice or evil choice cannot change his destiny. If the person was meant to die, then he will die at your hand, for which you should have great regret for the fact that it happened through you, not for the fact that it happened, because that's beyond your control. So if I want to hurt you, verbally, physically, and I try, I act on it, that's the extent of my freedom of choice. I mean, this is an obvious uh, experience that we all have. You try to do something, either good or bad, and it doesn't happen. Come on, that's so common. You know, if every anti-Semite could succeed, we'd be in big trouble. So not every evil impulse, not every evil decision, not every evil choice results in a disaster. When it does, it's because it was meant to happen, not because you caused it. So very physically, very visually, once you let go of the arrow, it's not under your control anymore, and the outcome and the result is not yours to determine. That's in terms of hurting others and being hurt. We have to know and we have to believe deeply. And when we have something happen that looks like it's bad coming from another person, it's a good opportunity to exercise this commitment and this trust. Only God runs the world. That's what we mean when we say Hashem Echad. We have only one God. We don't believe in the power of anything other than God to influence my existence, my life, and my well-being. So whatever comes to me as mine, which is a very important recognition and realization. My life, who I am and what I am meant to be, cannot be derailed by another person's choices. Can't. I am going to be me because that's all I'm destined to be, and nothing can change that. Now, of course, I would prefer to be a painless me and have a life free of pain. Of course, everybody would want that. But if there's never any pain, it might indicate that we're not really engaging in life as we know it on earth, because life on earth is not perfect yet. And so there will be disappointment, there will be frustration, there will be anxiety, and there will be pain, and there will be grief and tragedy, because that's the world we live in. And we are here to engage it, not to avoid it or to escape from it. So what makes the pain a little more tolerable? the realization that this is an ingredient in my life. It's not derailed me from my life. I am not a different person. I'm not myself because of the pain. The pain is one ingredient in a big picture, in a good life that God gives us. And the pain in some way either makes us sharper, appreciating our successes, appreciating life itself. What destroys us, as we mentioned in the previous talks, what destroys us is when we can't find the purpose, when we can't find the meaning behind these events. If we lose sight of meaning, then we've given up on life. So how many times have we had the experience where we thought for sure that what happened was a terrible thing, and it turned out to be not so terrible, turned out to be good, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened in our lives? So before we make a judgment on our own experience, on our own pain, and we decide that this was bad, this should never have happened to me, and because it did happen to me, it derailed me from my life. I am not who I'm supposed to be. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what my life is. I don't know. Before we make that decision, consider who invented life, who gave you life, who needs you to be alive in his world and doing the great things that you do. And so often, a little bit of pain distracts us, blinds us to all the good that is going on in our lives, to how much we have accomplished, and to how valuable our future promises to be. Maybe not despite the pain, but to some degree because of the pain. Makes us more human, more sympathetic, more empathetic, more humble. So we are not in any way, God forbid, approving of pain. Not our own, and certainly not somebody else's. We're not trying to justify it. We're not trying to get comfortable with it. We're simply trying to use it to our benefit. Of course, we would rather not have the pain. And we ask God to remove the pain and find a painless way of accomplishing the same thing that we accomplish through the pain. So, in one word, what is the antidote to the discouragement or the depression that comes from bad things happening to us? In one word, the answer is hashgacha. It's not meaningless ever, ever. The pain that we experience is a tiny reflection of the pain that God experiences. He is not indifferent. He is super sensitive and regrets the existence of pain and regrets the existence of death. So you say, well, then why did he create it? That's a very good question, but it should lead you to a very positive answer. If despite the pain, his pain, if despite the fact that he hates it and regrets it, it still exists and he still makes it happen, that must mean that it is so important that it is so vital that even he will put up with the pain. So if you think about it, every pain I've experienced, others have experienced greater pain. When we start to think, nobody has the pain that I have. No one suffers like I suffer. No one will ever understand the devastation that I experienced. That's a little arrogant. Pain is pain. All human beings are familiar. Nobody quite understands your particular reaction and sensitivity, but you're not an alien and you're not experiencing otherworldly pain. It's the pain that human beings are familiar with. So let's not go to the extreme. And if you hear yourself saying things like, no one understands what I'm going through, no one ever had this experience, this is the worst thing that ever happened in history. You're talking yourself into a depression because it's not true. The pain is very real, but it's real to the human being. And even if your pain or experience is rare, it means that few others have experienced it, but no one ever experienced it. That's over the top. You know, when you go to visit somebody who has real disabilities and real disadvantages and incurable conditions, whatever that means, and you go there thinking, what can I say to make them feel better? What can I say to boost their optimism, to help them appreciate the life that they have? And you're at loss. You don't know what to say. And you walk in and you discover that they have more enthusiasm and and are more optimistic about life than you are, about your life. And you find yourself inspired by them. What does this mean? The outsider, the viewer, can be overwhelmed by tragedy and pain and not know how to handle it. Maybe that's why it doesn't happen to them. To those who are experiencing it, those who actually go through the pain, somehow God gives them the tools to handle it. Only they understand how to thrive in the presence of such pain and tragedy. And we are amazed because we were never given that challenge. So we were never given the tools with which to handle that challenge. So to think that we can go to visit somebody who's had a terrible tragedy and we can make it better for them, go there to be inspired and impressed because they're amazing. They're awesome. What is the purpose of your visit? The purpose of your visit is to empathize, to share some of the pain. And by sharing, you make it lighter and easier because when two people carry a burden, it is not as heavy on either one of them as it would if somebody's carrying it alone. But prepare to be inspired because it's the amazing ability that God gives people to handle what to everybody else seems like an impossible disaster, an impossible tragedy, an impossible circumstance. So let's not fall apart. Let's not declare things as bad when we don't have the information. We don't know what should or shouldn't be. We know that we've judged in the past and it turned out to be the exact opposite of what we thought. We know that one human being is never the victim of another human being's choices. God does not abandon you to someone else because the someone else has to have freedom of choice. So if you feel like God has abandoned you, if you feel like God is not paying attention to you, you know that that is just pain talking. It's not really you. And God understands that also. So if you complain bitterly, it's not offensive. It's understandable. But complaining bitterly is understandable. It's not very helpful. So although you're justified and you're entitled to the complaining, when you've done the complaining, where are you going to go? What follows? How do you make life better with this bitter ingredient? And of course, it can be done. Bitter ingredients can enhance any food if you blend it properly. And that's why the reaction to every pain after the crying, after the therapy, if it's necessary, then we respond by adding more life. If there's a tragedy, a loss of life, we bring more life. If it's um, if it's pain, we add more pleasure. If it's distaste, we find more things that are tasteful. We we don't accept and we are not defeated by the pain, even when it's justified. Even though it's not a bad thing, it is still a painful thing, but that pain does not defeat us. Look, I mean, we've come we've come through some very serious pain. Now a person might think, I agree with all of that. And I'm very impressed with people who can make a life out of the pain, who can thrive despite the pain. Very impressed. I can't. I can't handle my pain. I cannot handle my tragedy. So I'll even agree with you that I should, and I wish I could, but I can't. I can't handle it. So fine. I'm at fault here. It's my weakness, it's my failure, but I'm failing. The reason we're talking right now, the reason we have this webinar is because sometimes people need people. Sometimes it's true. I can't help myself. I can't. I'm overwhelmed. I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. My faith in the Hashgacha Pratis is not that strong and not that vivid. So the pain seems much more real than the cure. And I cannot help myself. But that's why we have the gift of communication. I don't mean I don't mean the internet. The gift of communication where people can empathize and connect to the pain that another person feels and actually express it in words. So it may be true that you can't handle it, but that means that you can't handle it without help. But with help, much easier. So even the greatest tragedy, if it is shared, becomes a little more tolerable. In other words, if I'm not alone in my tragedy, if I'm not alone in my pain, it makes it a lot better. So sometimes the solution comes from a friend, people who need people. And that could be the whole purpose of the pain in the first place, to open us up to feeling connected, interconnected, interdependent, empathy with others, which means I don't exist in a bubble. Your pain affects me, your pleasure affects me, my pain affects you. We are an integrated system. We are not separate islands and separate realities. That's why there are poor people and rich people, so that the poor person can turn to the rich person and the rich person can be generous and share the poor person's burden. We know that we need each other. And that's why there are teachers and students. There are those who are geniuses who can discover great ideas, and then those who will learn from them to receive those teachings and those ideas, and so on throughout all of life, the strong and the weak, the healthy and the weak and the unhealthy, the doctor and the patient. All of these are ways in which God connects us to each other. Must be pretty important to need each other. If if pain is created to accomplish that, must be really important. And it could be that once we make that connection, the pain has achieved its purpose and now it can go away. Don't need it anymore. Mission accomplished. We are now sympathetic and empathetic. We feel for other people. We've made a connection. The pain can stop now. So the sooner we become more connected to each other, more sensitive to each other, more open to each other, the sooner all pain can stop because it's served its purpose. We don't need it anymore. It's interesting that after eating a meal, you have to wash your fingertips and your lips. Men have to do this. And the reason is because once you've eaten and you're no longer hungry, you have lost some of your sensitivity, some of your sympathy, and your ability to relate, to identify with a hungry person. That's the damage that eating brings. Because you're satisfied, and when you're satisfied, you don't really feel another person's hunger because you're not hungry. You have to wash that away. That negative effect that comes from eating has to be washed away so that we don't lose that sensitivity. We don't become a little numb to other people's needs, other people's hunger, other people's pain. So what do we have? Number one, good people do suffer. The suffering is not an indication that the person is not good, which means we can never blame the victim in order to protect God, who is causing the pain or the grief. So to protect your belief in God and to be comfortable with God as being kind and compassionate and just and so on. So in order to preserve your faith in God, you blame the person and say, it's not a bad thing happening to a good person. He must not really be a good person. That's completely unacceptable. That is completely wrong and bad. Bad choice. Number two, no human being is ever a victim of another human being. This does not justify the human being who chooses to do bad things and to hurt others. It doesn't justify them at all. But it also does not make them God and does not give them the power over life and death. That's important. Number three, if we can find meaning, we can tolerate and survive almost anything. Because what really destroys us is not pain and not grief. What destroys us is the thought that it's meaningless, that it's accidental, that it's without purpose and without reason. This we cannot tolerate because we are purposeful, reasonable, and just human beings. And so we're very disturbed when things don't make sense, when things don't have a purpose, or when things don't have a reason. So do we have to know what the reason is? I don't need to know and sometimes I don't even want to know what the reason is. But I know that there's a reason. How do I know? Because without a reason to cause the pain could not happen. Einstein said, everything in nature has to make sense. Every atom, every subatomic particle has to have its role and its purpose, and it's because God does not play dice with the universe. If this is true of the physical universe, of inanimate objects, then certainly it is true in our relationship with God that God does not abandon us to chance, to accident, or to other people's evil choices. Never. We cannot and we may not accuse God of that. Can we be mystified by how he runs his world and where he causes pain and where he causes tragedy? We can be totally mystified. And that's not surprising either, because he sees more before and after we can't see it. One good analogy. There's a boat passing ashore, a city. There are 3 people on the boat. One person is down below deck looking through the porthole. It's a small window and it allows you to see only what is directly facing the window. So you cannot see what you just passed. What you just saw a moment ago, you can no longer see because the ship has moved. What you're going to see in a minute, you do not see now because the ship has not moved that far. So all you see is the present. All you see is the little picture, little slice of life that is in front of the window, small window. Then there's a second person standing on deck. The person standing on deck has more peripheral vision. Out of the side of his eye, he can still see what the buildings that they passed a few minutes ago. And out of the side of his eye, he can see the buildings that they're going to pass in a few minutes. So he gets a bigger panoramic view than the guy in the porthole. Then there's a guy standing up, way up high in the observation deck. He sees the whole city. It's all there in front of his eyes. So he can tell the guy in the porthole where they were a half hour ago, what they saw a half hour ago, and he can tell the guy in the porthole what he is going to see in a half hour. Not because he's a prophet, but simply because he has a better view. He sees more. That changes what the guy is seeing in the porthole. Because if you know what came before and you know what comes after, it changes the picture. So a guy in the porthole can think, wow, this town consists of one big building. What kind of town is that? But then he discovers, no, there are more buildings coming. There's a bigger picture. Oh, that's a different kind of town. So even the building he's seeing now takes on a new meaning, part of a big city, rather than the only building in town. So when we look at what's in the porthole, because that's all we can see, we have to remember that there's a past and there is a future. And unless we see them both, or all 3, we don't really get a good picture. One final thought. What happens when you take 1,000 pieces of paper, and on 999 of them, you write the word yes. On one out of the 1,000, you write the word no. You put them all into a bowl, into a hat. You mix them all together, and you draw one piece of paper, and it's the no. You throw it back in, mix them all together, randomly pick out another piece of paper. You pick out a paper, and it says no. It's the no. Do it a third time. No. A fourth time, the no comes up. Now you do it a fifth time. When you draw the paper for the fifth time, are you expecting a yes or a no? From your experience, because you came up with the no 4 times in a row, you might now start to expect the no in the fifth time. On the other hand, there are 999 yeses, only one no. What are your chances of coming up with the no? So after 5 times, if you expect the no, you're a real pessimist. You've become a pessimist. Say, well, okay, that's if it's 5 times. But what if I came up with the no 10 times in a row? Come on, 10 times in a row, I get the no. So now I'm going to do it on the 11th time. I'm going to pick a piece of paper out of the bowl. What should I expect? If you expect the no, you're irrational. It's understandable. Again, it's very understandable that you might expect the no. 10 times in a row. So it's understandable, but it's not reasonable. Because reasonably, if you have 1,000 pieces of paper and only one of them says no, your chances of picking the no are very slim. What about the fact that you picked the no 10 times in a row? I don't know. That's weird. But it doesn't change reality. It only changes our mood. It discolors our vision. Doesn't change the facts. So the guy who had the no come up 10 times in a row, and now he's going to pick an 11th time, and he absolutely confidently trusts that he will get a yes, he's a reasonable human being. So this is what we should consider when we judge our lives. Yes, there were no's, came up a lot. And sometimes it seems like the only thing that ever comes up is the no. That's what happened. But what's going to happen? Suppose you have 1,000 pieces of paper and you came up with the no 100 times in a row. Weird. 100 times in a row, the no comes up. And now you're going to try the 101st time. Should you expect a no or should you expect a yes? Rationally, you should expect a yes. Makes sense. In terms of mood, you could become cynical. You could become pessimistic. Doesn't make it rational. It doesn't make it right. So every day that goes by and the world is still not perfect and there's still pain in the world, that's weird. Does that mean it's always going to be this way? Of course not. Goodness is much more real than pain. Godliness is much more real than grief. So what should you expect when you wake up in the morning? Despite what happened for the last 100 days in a row, you have to expect what's expectable, what is reasonable. Life, good things. So what was meant to be. What's going to be, only good stuff. That's the reasonable thing to expect. The past, the no's that kept coming up, that's the weird thing. That's the exception to the rule. The rule is when you have 999 against one, you get the yes, not the no. The Rebbe taught us something really important. If we find ourselves overwhelmed, burdened by unpleasant things, the best cure, the best response is, what about everybody else? Broaden your horizon, broaden the picture. Maybe your life is really bad, God forbid. But your life is not the only life. If you can't make your life better, is that a reason not to help others have a better life? It is so liberating. It's so healthy for our sanity and certainly for our morality. My life, yeah, I'm disappointed. I'm not impressed. But isn't that a really good reason to help others who have maybe a more optimistic life? If I can't help myself and I'm a little defeated in that area, does that mean that I can't help somebody else make their life better? And if I do help someone make their life better, doesn't that already make my life better? So the Rebbe kept telling us, don't get lost in yourself. Don't get isolated into your tiny life when there is so much life around you. And maybe the message that we're getting when we have disappointments in our own life, the message is there is more life in the world than yours. Look at a bigger picture. See the bigger picture. And if you can make a difference in someone else's life, that is the greatest thing you can do to improve your own life. Isn't it? Doesn't it feel that way? One final consolation. It's interesting how good is more powerful than negative. The positive is more powerful than the negative. You see, for example, a girl is trying to get married. Years go by, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, trying to get married. It is so painful. It's such torture. It's indescribable. And the damage that it can cause in a person's mind and heart, frightening to even think about. 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Horrible. And then in the 8th year, she gets married. I'm sure you've seen this. The 8 years of agony disappear. Disappear. You never hear a married woman, a newlywed married woman say, oh, I had some really, really painful, oh, were they bad? It's so gone. It is so forgotten. It is so erased by the good news because the good is so much more powerful than the negative. The same is true with every pain and every tragedy. When we go on with our lives and life develops and unfolds and we have a life, it's amazing how the pain becomes a vague memory, as if it didn't even happen to me. I remember it happened, but I don't remember to whom. It doesn't feel like it happened to me. So if you're getting a little pessimistic about your future, it's not justified. Good things will happen, and when they do, they erase the painful and the negative so thoroughly. It's like that joke about a guy who comes in from the desert and people try to talk to him, but he can't talk because I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. So you give him a drink. And now you try to talk to him and he can't talk to you because was I thirsty? I was so thirsty. That doesn't happen. Once you have a drink, the thirst is gone. Like a cough. Once you finish coughing, it's gone. So be optimistic. It's justified, it's sensible, it's intelligent, and it's true. When the good comes around, all the pain will be forgotten. And that's why, with the coming of Mashiach, it's not that we're looking forward to an end to the pain, an end to death, an end to all tears. That would never be enough. We're looking forward to Mashiach because the good that he will bring will erase all the pain that had been, all the grief that had been. Anything less is not really Mashiach. So let's get excited about life. It is magnificent. There is so much good, and the good is so good, and it's so real. The pain, we'll outlive it, we'll get beyond it, and we'll actually use it to motivate us to appreciate life even more. Bad things don't happen, and pain is only temporary. Grief is only temporary. Death is only temporary. And that's why we console people who, God forbid, experience a grief and a loss by saying, God should console you like he consoles the Jewish people over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. What is the consolation? It's temporary. It will be rebuilt, bigger, greater, and more permanent than the previous ones. It's taken a while, I know. But the good is the 999 pieces of paper. The negative is just one piece. So no matter how many years go by where there is pain and there is grief, it's a fluke. That's not what life is about. That's not what the world is about. That's not what God created us for. And therefore, at best, it is temporary. That's helpful. And it's real. So believe in goodness. Don't be impressed by the negative. It hurts, but it's not what life is about. Life is not about pain. And life is not about grief. Life is about meaning, purpose. So if you can help somebody else make their life a little warmer and a little brighter, then you have made your life wonderful. despite the pain. If pain could stop us from being good, we would have disappeared a long time ago. So we are familiar with pain. We are the most experienced in the painful side of life as a people. Our history is full of it, full of pain. And here we are, quite alive, inventive, constructive, optimistic, enthusiastic. How did we do it collectively? That should encourage us. We can do it individually as well. So, the response to the painful things in life is that we don't want the pain because we want life. So, if anything interferes with life, we will fight for the life. We will protect the life. We will dig for deeper and richer soil of life. And we'll find it because there's 999 layers of goodness. Don't be impressed with the pain. Just want to repeat that quote from Elie Wiesel. When tragedy happens, we don't want an explanation. We just want life. When tragedy happens, we don't want to understand and appreciate the benefits of it. We know that there are, in God's mysterious ways, there's some benefit, a very important benefit. But that's for God's purpose. That's for God's vision. That's for Him to decide. We choose life. Life is not pain. Life is not tragedy. Life is warmth. Life is brightness. Life is movement. That's what we choose. So no matter how much pain God introduces into the world for divine reason and for good reason and for just reasons, we ignore that. We choose life. So let's spread warmth and life, movement, growth. Let's make life what we want it to be. God will do what God needs to do, but He doesn't want us to participate in the painful stuff. He wants us to go about celebrating life even while He has to do things that He Himself does not like, and we certainly don't like. So we do not accept the pain. We don't worship the pain. We don't respect the pain, and we're not going to let it get in the way. Ubacharta b'chaim, we choose life. It's the Jewish way. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it helps take the edge off at the very least and allow us all to thrive on the beauty of life, on the importance of life, on mimicking God by choosing life, even when painful things need to happen. We should all have a great summer with lots of good news, the ultimate good news that the world has become sane, finally, that the world has found its direction and its purpose, and that the prophecy that in the end of days, all human beings will serve God collectively in cooperation with each other, because once you know the goal, then you know where you're going, and then everybody goes together. We should have that. We should see that in our time, in our day, and without delay. It's time that the world become what it is meant to be so that we never again have to talk about pain or about suffering or about tragedy. A very good, healthy, happy summer.